that you need.
All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. There is a twist to tonight's podcast as I'm not flying solo, as for the first time in a very long time, I have a very special guest on this edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. I'm privileged to be joined by Mr. Ernest Dancy. Ernest and I go back very, 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 for a very, very long time. Not going to add two more very, verys to it. Uh, Very talented brother here has done some tremendous work in different genres of life. And right now, he is gracing us and gracing me with his presence on this platform. And Ernest, I want to take the time first and foremost before we even get into tonight's discussion to give you your flowers. Okay, as far as what you have accomplished, in your life for yourself and so many others around you, and just definitely want to show you the love and respect that you deserve. And once again, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for having me. The pleasure is all mine. I'm excited to just get started, get talking about NBA basketball, a sport that you and I hold very dearly, that we love. Yeah, I'm ready to go. Excited.
Yeah, yeah, I was on Ern's channel about a week ago, so anybody who missed it, and you still have the opportunity to check it out, please do, and we'll definitely drop the information on here before we are done with this presentation. But Ern, last time we talked about um, you know, the stretch run, if you will, for the NBA
Mhm.
regular season, and now the postseason's here. I think, for before we really get into the meat and potatoes of this particular podcast, I think it was nice for the NBA with what they did, and we've seen a lot of leagues doing this now. Last day of the regular season, everybody's basically starting off around the same time. All the games are on the same day. So you know what you have to do, to get out there, possibly get into the playoffs, avoid the play-in tournament. Nobody had to fight, scrap, and claw to make the play-in tournament this year, but there was still plenty of seeding at stake on both in both conferences. And credit to the NBA for doing that. We've seen the MLB do it, the NFL, the NHL as well, and I think the NBA rather, has finally gotten on board with that.
I think that was very important. And like you said, that was a major step in the right direction because it really increased the stakes as it pertained to the ending part, the latter part of the regular season being super important. They maybe did not fight to get into the play-in, but that seeding is major because it can mean literally, it can mean the difference between winning and losing in your 7 game series if you do make it into the actual playoffs from the play-in. So yeah, it was super exciting today. Like you said, everybody was basically playing at the same time. So regardless of what your intentions were, you had to play hard because you didn't know what was going on because you were actually playing in the game. So yeah, I could not agree with you more. It was super exciting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, basically everybody knows where they're going at this point. And honestly, I think we are in store for an exciting playoff because clearly the intensity is going to ratchet up, and I think it's going to start in the play-in tournament because we got some heavyweights in the play-in tournament this year. But nonetheless, you and I wanted to talk about international born players in the NBA right now in comparison to American born players in the league right now. And it's a contrast because you're looking at it and, you know, some of the best players right now are not American born players.
Very true.
The last couple of MVPs, have not been born in the United States. Nikola Jokic has two MVP trophies on his mantle. Joel Embiid has one. Giannis has two as well. And honestly, this might be another year where we do not see an American born player win the NBA's MVP. Now, you look at LeBron. You look at Steph, you look at KD, clearly, three superstars, clearly on the second half of their career, because I'm not going to say downside because each one of them, they're still contributing at a very high level for their respective team.
They're
But
all still top 20, top
exactly,
15 even.
exactly. But my question to you is, where does that next wave of American stars come from?
Well, we can't count Ja out. He's still a star.
Hmm.
Zion was healthy this season, so we've seen what he can do. I mean, he really paced himself in the beginning so that he could stay that way, and then he started to ratchet up the intensity, right? So we still have Zion. We have Ant-Man, Anthony Edwards. He's a star. He's a bona fide star, and he actually wants the mantle. He wants to be known as the best player in the NBA. So here's my question to you as it pertains to Americans. Are we talking about all of North America? Are we talking about Shea Gilgeous-Alexander? Is he a foreign-born player or is
Listen, man. I mean, he's repping the Maple Leaf, man. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, like he's definitely North American. You
he's
know what I'm
North
saying?
American?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but he's not a USA guy.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? But for me, it's just like, you brought up some very interesting names, and obviously out of sight, out of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a lot of people are gonna feel things, especially with a guy like John Morant. When John Morant is on top of his game, okay, he is one of the most exciting players in the NBA. Of course, an injury-plagued year this year, a lot of off the court, issues in recent years. We've seen,
Mm-hmm.
we've seen Ja get his name cleared, in some stuff, but clearly going forward, he's just gonna have to distance himself from those type of situations. So this way,
Yes.
he's never even thought of in that light. Um, I'm not sure. Well, first and foremost, I don't think Adam Silver is David Stern for a lot of different
No, he's not. He's very player friendly.
right. But David Stern also, I think David Stern was more business savvy than Adam Silver, and David Stern knew how to market his top stars. David
Mm-hmm.
Stern also knew the importance of putting big time stars in big time markets. It wasn't an accident, okay, that Larry Bird ended up with the Boston Celtics. It was
And that
not a
Magic ended up with the Lakers.
that was no accident. It was no accident in 1985 with the first NBA draft lottery that in spite of the fact that the Indiana Pacers had a worse record than the New York Knicks, that the New York Knicks ended up with the first overall pick to get Patrick Ewing. So my point is this: can Adam Silver go out there and market, okay, his young American stars like an Anthony Edwards, like a John Morant in Minneapolis and Memphis, respectively, or would they need to be in a bigger market?
So I think that the main difference between this era and yesteryear is the fact that with the prevalence of social media, every market is a major market. As long as you are playing well and you have that charisma about you and you
Hmm.
have that social media following, he can most definitely thrive in Minnesota. Ant-Man.
Hmm.
KG thrived in Minnesota. It wasn't a lack of spotlight on KG. It was just that the team wasn't good enough to consistently get through the West. He was already a big name before he got traded to the Boston Celtics. Um, we talk about the New York Knicks, arguably the best point guard in the NBA right now, like currently playing. He's definitely top three. Some would argue that besides Shea Gilgis Alexander and Doncic, right? He's the best scoring point guard in the NBA currently, and that's
Hmm.
Brunson. That's Jalen Brunson. And if we want to say American born, he's the number one point guard in the NBA currently. The kid is putting on a show. He's averaging about 37, 38 points per game over his last 5 or 6 games. We just see what he did earlier today against who was it? Chicago.
Chicago,
He's
yeah.
a bona fide superstar. And who would have known that he would have this type of scoring prowess? So he's in New York in that major market. We have Anthony Edwards in Minnesota, and the fact that he has Carl Anthony Towns with him and Rudy Gobert hailing from France. So you have that entire market focused on that team. That's a
Hmm.
lot of exposure. So I
Hmm.
think that Adam Silver is more than equipped to lead the NBA publicity wise and its young stars into the zeitgeist, full exposure to the public, to the market. Proof of that would be the NBA television deals that he's been able to close. That takes a lot of skill. So,
Right.
yeah, you're right. David Stern put the league on par to be where it is today, without a doubt. Without a doubt. But Adam Silver is no slouch. And I think that he treats the players better.
Yeah, like he's definitely more of a of a players commissioner than David Stern was. I've talked about that, on different topics because I felt like, what, David Stern would not have allowed, certain things to go as far as they did, a la, the lack of effort in the All-Star game. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
David Stern would have definitely nipped that issue in the bud a long time ago. And David Stern was a no nonsense guy. Just basically, you just like look at how the league changed. After the whole Ron Artest incident in Auburn Hills, like basically the dress code was implemented. All of this stuff is David Stern was like, you know what, you're not gonna mess up my money. You know what I'm saying? It's definitely it's definitely one of those deals. But I mean, you just look at how the game has changed with more, foreign born players, especially, guys from Europe coming over and having success. Do you think that with more foreign born players coming to the NBA, do you think that has really led to more of a focus on offense and a lack of defense in the NBA?
I think that I think the prevalence of the 3-point shot itself,
Hmm.
the higher frequency of attempts, thanks to Golden State, is what actually has led to more scoring and emphasizing the ability of the 5 and the 4 man to trail a play,
Hmm.
stop at the 3-point line, and pop. I think that that has pulled the other big men out of the lane and increased the ability to either shoot the three or get right to the basket for a layup or a dunk. So it's
Hmm.
3 pointers, layup or dunks, and free throws, essentially. So I don't think that is actually the emphasis on foreign-born players getting drafted that increased the scoring output and decreased the defensive intensity.
Hmm.
I think it's the 3-point shot. It leads to long rebounds, so it leads to more fast breaks. So I think that that's what actually did it, and the fact that they don't let you touch anybody. It's the rule changes.
Hmm.
And case in point, scoring is very high in the regular season, right? But in the playoffs, they actually do allow you to put hands on people. They
Right.
actually do allow you to get more physical on defense. And that's why players like Jimmy Butler and LeBron, they
Right.
rise to the
Yeah.
top
Yeah.
because they can actually play through contact. They can post up, pull up mid range. That's the difference. That's why Chris Middleton is so important to the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, like listen, it's one of those where, as the season progresses, definitely the intensity goes to another level. Take for an example the Knicks Bulls game today.
Mm-hmm.
That was a playoff type atmosphere.
Yeah.
Both of those teams played like it was a playoff type game. And clearly, it's one of those you saw defensive stops by a guy like Alex Caruso. The Lakers definitely
He
miss him.
was big time, big
Yeah.
time. Him,
Yeah.
him and OG Anunoby. Did you
Right,
see that
right,
defense?
right. So it's one of those for me. The intensity, does ratchet up. Guys do focus more on defense. Because it's one of those where too much. I think guys just cakewalk. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
At times, during the regular season, and they kind of like sleepwalk until they get to the playoffs. And I think now the real season starts because there's not going to be all of this load management. There's not going to be resting. The only two guys I'm really looking at as far as resting, you know, two foreign-born players, Giannis and Embiid, obviously clearly because they're dealing with
Those
injuries, and
injuries.
what I'm saying, and big injuries at that. But nonetheless, to me, there's been so many different changes. You look at like the impact of the Euro step, you know,
Hmm.
and what that has brought in. You look at a guy like Dirk Nowitzki, and Dirk was a guy. I'm not. I could say Dirk was before his time. You know what I'm saying? Because
He was.
a big that could do what he did. And the thing was, Dirk still had to bang in a time when the bigs really banged, and it's one of those where it's kind of like with KG. People would always be quick to say, "Wow, KG never he struggled to get out of the first round for so many years in Minnesota." The West with the bigs alone at that time was so difficult. You had Shaq, prime Shaq with the Lakers,
Yep.
Tim Duncan with the Spurs, Karl Malone with the Jazz, Rasheed Wallace with the Blazers, and
Chris Webber.
Chris Webber with the Kings. We could just go right down the list because most of the guys that I just mentioned are Hall of Famers. And
Yep.
but you look at a guy like Dirk, and how things have changed, because of his impact on the league. Steve Nash, another foreign-born guy from Canada. But then also with me, a guy, a lot of people might not, like the younger generation, might not focus on him. A guy like Tony Kukoc, because Tony Kukoc, to me, I think in the NBA was ahead of his time. He could have definitely thrived in this open era of ball. You know what I'm
He
saying?
would have been a superstar.
Oh, definitely, definitely, definitely. But some people, speaking of the American born players and foreign born players, there's a lot of people out there who want to say that what the fundamentals of the NBA are not what they once were. And there are some people who are leaning on saying, "Hey, you know what? The international guys, they might have one game a week and they practice like 5 or 6 times, whereas the American guys through the AAU ranks and so much others, they're playing like 5 or 6 times a week and only practicing once." If that's true, okay, do you ride with that? Do you think that has or is having an impact on things?
No, I don't think so because I want you to name me the foreign born players under 6'6" who dominated in the NBA.
Listen, this side of Steve Nash, you really can't name a lot.
Nope. Only Ginobili didn't dominate. He was great, but Ginobili, who was like 6'6" or 6'7",
Right.
right? Tony Parker got a Finals MVP with
Mhm.
4 championships. He has
Correct.
4 or 5. Tony.
Tony Parker was there for four. He was not there
4,
for
yeah,
when
because
when
Avery
I
Johnson got one of the championships, right?
that
So
is
Tony
correct.
Parker has 4.
Hmm.
Luca doesn't have any championship yet, and
Right.
Luca's about 6'7".
Right.
Uh, the most skilled players in the world are not bigs. The most skilled players in the world are the little guys by virtue of you have to be more skilled the smaller you are in order to compete in a game of giants.
Hmm.
And America still, by far, a large margin, has the most skilled players in the world. If we use that borderline, you know what I'm saying? That range, that scale. If we use that scale, we're still the most skilled. All of the other players are bigs, like literally all of them. Giannis, who's nobody will call one of the most skilled players.
He's not.
He's just extremely athletic,
Correct.
and his aggression and his ambition, that is something that you can't really duplicate. That's
Nah.
something you can't teach. So
Nah.
credit to him for that.
No.
But
Definitely.
nobody would confuse him with the most skilled, being the most skilled player on the court.
Hmm.
So then you have Embiid, you have Jokic, you have Sabonis and his son. But his son learned a lot about the game here
From over here,
in America.
because if my memory doesn't fail me, I think Domantas Sabonis. did play at least 2 years of college at Gonzaga. I know he went to Gonzaga, definitely. I'm just trying to remember whether it was 1 year or 2 years. I really think it was 2 years without looking
And
it up.
Embiid played a lot of like high school and like college ball. Definitely he played
Mhm.
here.
Yeah,
I
he
think
did.
he might have played 1 year of high school ball here. I
And
don't
he
remember.
he played 1 year at Kansas, but he really didn't play a year because he was injured. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying? So he played part of that year.
yeah. So I might be wrong about Embiid.
Hmm.
But even Ben Simmons, who nobody wants to mention and nobody should mention because he's robbing the league,
Right,
he played a lot of his high school ball here, not
right.
in Australia. And
Hmm.
then of course college ball here.
Right.
So it's arguable. It's
But
a good argument.
listen, just switching the subject for a minute for Ben Simmons, I think his 1 year at LSU might have been the last time he played a full season of basketball.
I think so. I think you might be right.
Because honestly, that year LSU they turned down an invitation to the NCAA tournament because basically, guys like Ben Simmons, they were just focusing on the next step, which was getting out of Dodge
Yeah.
and heading to the NBA. But
Yeah, he packed it in.
yeah,
He
oh yeah.
packed it in early.
Oh, definitely, definitely, man. But like for me, I just look at the fundamentals, and it's not an international thing. It's not an American thing. I just feel, and I think, guys of our generation, because we've seen different eras of basketball, the fundamentals have left the game. And for me, I think it's especially at the defensive end where we've seen so much to your point, like you alluded to earlier, as far as the focus on, the offensive side of the ball. And, now we hear this thing as far as like different terms like two-way player and all this other stuff. For me, we talked about this like about a week ago, as far as like, we grew up in an era where guys, wanted to play, each end of the floor. And it's one of those where do you ever think that the game gets back to that where what guys really want to be known as an all-around player, not just an offensive player?
I think that Kawhi has shown that when you play hard on both sides of the court, you get more respect. And I think the trickle down effect is Ant-Man.
Hmm.
Ant-Man plays extremely hard on both sides of the floor. I don't think Russell Westbrook gets enough credit for how hard he also plays defensively. He's no slouch
Hmm.
defensively. There might be some lapses, especially his later years with OKC when he had to carry essentially the whole team after Durant left, and he had to focus a lot on
Right,
scoring. But Russ is another athletic defender because he's big for his position.
right.
Um, a foreign born player, Embiid, he plays both sides of the ball. And but nobody ever really talks about him as it pertains to defensive player of the year, somebody in the running for that. But Embiid is no slouch. He's one of those people who wants to score 35 and hold the opposing center to 10. So we do still have some players that take it seriously and don't think that it's just one or the other.
No, listen, to your point about Joel Embiid, I do agree with you because it's one of those where when you watch Joe, like he takes it personal when he faces other bigs. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? It's like, listen, it's one of those where say what you want, but Joel Embiid is living rent free in Carl Anthony Towns' head. Okay,
Yes.
and then eventually, we saw them, get into a tussle. I think maybe about a year and a half ago or so, and it's one of those where Embiid, when he's on top of his game, he to me, I think, is the one guy in the NBA that gives the Joker problems. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He is the one guy. Okay. But for me, my next question is for you because LeBron has been the face of the league for so long. Steph Curry's been right there. KD's been in that ilk. Okay. And we know, of course, two of those three guys that I just mentioned, probably in the next 5 years, you know, all of them are probably going to be done playing ball. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I mean, you figure LeBron. LeBron's 39. To me, I don't think he has anything left to prove. 40,000 career points and counting. 4 NBA championships. I think 3 times or 4 times MVP of the league.
Yeah, yup,
Okay, and
definitely.
he's
4 finals MVPs.
correct. Okay, I think honestly, I think LeBron's probably trying to hold on number one for another big payday, which he will get.
Yep,
And then also, I think he's really holding out hope that he could play with his son. You
at
know,
least one of them. It might
right,
be Bryce. You never
right,
know
right,
because LeBron has at least 2 more years of averaging 25 a game.
right.
And I believe he shot something like 40% from three
hmm
this season. So now he's actually hitting the 3-point shot with consistency, which could prolong his ability to play at such a high level.
hmm So, we talked about Ant Edwards. We talked about Ja Morant. I'm just going to mention a couple of other names out there as far as, American-born players and whether or not you feel that they can carry that mantle, if you will, and be the face of the league going forward.
Okay.
Jason Tatum.
I mean, they hold him in high regard. I personally don't care for his game that much,
hmm
but they're going to keep mentioning him, and he plays in such a big market for such a historical franchise.
hmm
Uh, I mean, of course, he's talented. Of course, he's a really good player. But for how long are you young? For
Right.
how long are you considered young before you take that step and you
hmm
you say to yourself, I'm going to dominate, I'm going to show everybody that I'm the best player in the league and nobody's going to stop me. I haven't seen him do it yet, and this season was one of those seasons in which he had the opportunity and he had everybody around him. You got Porzingis, you got Jalen Brown, you got Holiday, you got Derek White, who's now emerged. You got Al Horford coming off the bench. You have an Eastern Conference in which there is no starting five that can match yours. Well, it was his for the taking, and he didn't do it. So that's how I feel about Jason Tatum.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Jason Tatum, to your point, he has, had his opportunities, and I think getting helping the Celtics get to the Eastern Conference Finals numerous times, okay? Because they got there even when LeBron was still playing in Cleveland,
Yep.
okay? And they lost. And the struggles with the Heat, they finally got to the finals a couple of years ago and lost to Golden State. But typically, when we see Tatum, I mean, when we see the Celtics lose in those scenarios, a lot of it comes down to what Tatum didn't do. And
Yes.
like we talked about the other day, is one of those where I think the biggest issue with Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown is they try to be something that they're not, and they try to be perimeter players when their strengths are more getting to the basket and playing the post. Obviously before Kobe died, Jason Tatum was working with him on his game. And it's one of those where Kobe took it from Mike as far as, playing the post, because as a guard, it can't be all about the perimeter all the times. You got to try to drive, get to that basket. And then
Yep.
when Michael Jordan learned how to play that post, that and with that fadeaway, his game went to the next level. And of course, when I say his game went to the next level, the success on the court as a team, okay, a
Yes.
part of
Yep.
it.
In that win loss column.
Correct. And it was the same thing with Kobe. Kobe wasn't like flying through the air all the time with all the jump shots for three. Kobe was a terror in
Yeah.
that
He got
post.
methodical with it in the post.
Right. And I think that's something that Tatum needs to work on. And it's like, to your point, the Celtics are a historical franchise. I mean, you can't talk about the history of the NBA and probably like two sentences in not mention the Boston Celtics. And of course, the Celtics are one of those teams, if they win a championship, not only that city, but the league would run with it, because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's another championship for the Celtics. It's one of those where the NBA oohs and ahs, okay, and that's the nicest way I'm going to put it. I can put it in
Yeah.
a whole nother way when they know that, hey, we've got the Celtics and Lakers in the finals,
Yes.
or we've got the Knicks in the finals, because
Yep.
they know there's certain eyes that's going to be on their product. And to your point, Jason Tatum has been put in that prime position, but unfortunately, he has been unable to come up with it. I'm going to throw another name out there. You had talked about him before, but let just get some more thoughts from you on that. Zion Williamson.
So Zion, the mistake that people made was probably comparing Zion to LeBron early on, right? When it was obvious the path that Zion needs to duplicate and follow in order to give him the best chances at ultimate success is Barkley. Zion is like a more athletic Barkley, which is crazy to say because people forget how athletic and bouncy Barkley actually was, even at that size. They forget about the Philadelphia 76ers years when Barkley was throwing it on everybody. He was putting it on people's heads. He's actually my favorite power forward of all time, Charles Barkley,
Mhm.
believe it or not. Um, Zion needs to pattern his game after Charles. Now, watching him this season, I actually think that if he had a more natural point guard, even though I love CJ McCollum,
Mhm.
I love him. CJ, I love his game. He's a great combo guard who it's a damn shame that CJ has never been an all-star in all actuality. But if he had a point guard like Chris Paul when Chris Paul first got to Phoenix and helped Devin Booker take that next step, right? If
Mhm.
he had that type of a point guard, I think that people would be talking about Zion differently. I do believe that he's turning a corner.
Mhm.
I do believe that him becoming a father and him seeing other players, especially American born players, taking that next step, I think that it has lit a fire under him. And I think he's just tired of hearing people talk about him in a fashion in which he shouldn't be talked about. So I think that Zion is on the cusp of once again being put on the same level as like a Ja Morant or where Ja Morant was. I think that he's right there. I think that he's right there. He had a healthy season. That's all he needed.
Yeah, listen, I like, you can't contribute, if you're at the end of the bench in like street clothes or you're not even on the bench because you're in the trainer's room, getting treatment. And to your point, a lot of people's points, and I'm going to allude to that too, you know, Zion just needed and still needs to, I think, going forward, take his conditioning, more serious. Okay.
Yep.
And it's one of those, sometimes he plays around 275, 280. I really think Zion could still be an impact player at 260, maybe 265. And it's to your point, Zion might not have the height, of a Giannis, the height of an Embiid or a guy like that. But at the end of the day, with his thick frame, when Zion,
Exactly.
when Zion plays the post, there's nobody in the league that can stop him. Why? Because nobody wants any part of that physicality. Okay,
Nobody.
no, in a different era, if you had to go up against a Rick Mahorn or Charles Oakley, okay, you know what? You might have to earn that bucket a little bit more. But when Zion puts his back to the basket, can nobody stop him? And it's one of those, to
No.
your point, if he's on the court, because people want to see Zion play. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
People,
And he's
people,
a good kid.
yeah, what I'm saying? People want to see him go out there and play. So it's one of those for me. If he's out there, I think he can be an impact player. I'm not sure that I would put him personally in the category of being like the next face of the league. I just don't see that impact. One guy and that's just my opinion, but one
Mhm.
guy, one guy that you mentioned before, like it was Ant Edwards, and I think Ant Edwards can be that guy for a variety of reasons, but it really, I know, like you mentioned about the social media aspect, and it's legit true. I just don't see Ant Edwards long term in Minnesota. I just don't see it happening, man. Because
No, I don't
and
either.
and the,
I don't either.
and the reason why I say that is because, the Timberwolves historically are a losing franchise, and it's one of those where Ant Edwards is
Bad management.
bad management. And honestly, we saw the bad management pop up several days ago because
Yeah.
Alex Rodriguez and his partner basically were about to take that next step and become majority owners of that franchise. And
Yep.
the current majority owner, Glenn Taylor, was like, well, not so fast. And part of the reasoning for it, to me, at the end of the day, was a stupid reason. It was basically A Rod is like, listen, we need to cut salary. And the reason why we need to cut salary is that additional apron,
Apron.
right? And that's going to make a lot of teams think twice as far as who they pay and who they don't pay.
Hmm.
It's one of those where if you got guys bumping heads over that, it's going to be a trickle down effect to the team, and it's unfortunate because the Timberwolves, they just finished. I think they have the 3 seed in the West. Okay,
Yes.
yeah, because
Because OKC finished with the number one seed, right? It's
right,
OKC, Denver,
Denver,
and then
then
Minnesota.
Minnesota, and I think this is their second best record in the regular season ever because in 2004 they went 58-24. That was the year when they had Sam Cassell and Troy Hudson and Latrell
And Latrell
Spree,
Sprewell.
right, along with Kevin Garnett. And this is something that we should be talking about. But I do think, to your point, Ant Edwards does have the potential because Anthony Edwards to me is a guy, he plays angry. And when I say angry, he's a guy that he wants the spotlight on him. He wants those pressure-packed moments on him. And I really do think that he is a guy, from an American aspect, that can go forward and be the face of the league.
Yeah, I could not agree more. As it pertains to the debate between the foreign-born players and the homegrown players, right?
Hmm.
What do you consider Kyrie?
Wow, this is very interesting because Kyrie was not born in the U.S., but Kyrie, you know basically grew up in the U.S. You
He's
know,
from Jersey.
right? You know what I'm saying? And I know people that know the family. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's one of those type things. Kyrie is one of those guys where what I think at the end of the day, it's kind of it's kind of like the Michael Jordan effect. And the reason why I say it is this. Michael Jordan was born in Brooklyn. That's something
Hmm.
that the people in New York City, will
We
always say.
know.
Right.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, you don't consider Michael Jordan a guy from New York because guess what? His family left, New York when he was like a year or 2 years old. And he grew up and honed his skills and down in North Carolina. And of course,
Yep.
the rest is history. So I me personally, I'll put MJ in that. I'll put Kyrie rather in that category. Now, again, a name I want to throw at you from an international aspect. We saw him dominate this year as a rookie, and I think he's going to do bigger and better things in year number two, especially if the organization does a good job of drafting and developing other players around him. Victor Wembanyama. Do you think he's a guy from an international aspect that can be the face of the league going forward?
Okay. Oh, and just for the people who may not have known,
Mhm.
Kyrie was born in Australia because
Australia,
that's
yep.
where his pops was hooping at.
Right.
His pops was hooping in Australia, but his
Hmm.
pops is from Jersey. His godfather is Rod Strickland, who's now the head basketball coach at our alma mater,
There you
Long
go.
Island University.
Hmm.
Right. So as it pertains to Victor Wembanyama, I think that he is most definitely going to be, if not the face of the league, he's going to be top three in rotation as it pertains to the NBA's marketing,
Hmm.
and deservedly so because he surpassed expectations just like LeBron did his rookie year. Uh, the dude was phenomenal this season. He's only going to get better, and I was just so surprised at his durability. I thought for sure that he was going to get hurt his rookie year, and he didn't. So he not only played most of the games, but he played at an extremely high level. I do think that he deserves Defensive Player of the Year. regardless of what the Spurs record was. Yeah, he's going to be a face of the league. It's without question. He's going to be, and he's going to change the way the league actually drafts because they're going to be looking for players of his height that can stretch the floor and that can handle the ball. So yeah, it's going to be crazy. And the trickle down effect, even though Shaq gets angry because Shaq says, Bobo was the first player to be able to do that, right? If people didn't notice, Bobo started to get more playing time now with the Phoenix Suns. And I think that that is a result of what Victor Wembanyama was doing this season.
Hmm.
It made Phoenix, Frank Vogel, say, you know what? We have somebody similar to that right on our bench, and he could probably help us. And he's been practicing with Kevin Durant
Yeah.
all season. We
Yeah.
need to give Bobo some playing time. So yeah, I think even with that trickle down effect, like people will see Victor's impact.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those where, I mean, you think about it in a different era, Wimbiana definitely still would have been drafted, but, he would have been more of a back to the basket guy. I remember, a name out of the past. I remember when the Sixers took Sean Bradley, I think second overall that year, and they basically tried to make him something that he wasn't. But at the end of the day, you can't coach 7'6". And in the case of Victor Wembanyama, he's 7'4", I think 7'5".
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, you can't coach that height. And clearly, he's more polished, on the offensive end. He brings that perimeter aspect to the game as well. For me, the other thing is like,
And Sean Bradley just, I mean, he was not skilled.
no, he wasn't. He wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a big guy, and I think, credit to the Suns because we've seen Bol, with several teams around the league, and I think what happens sometimes with some teams, they draft big guys, but they draft them for something that they're not. And
Yeah.
I talked about this last night, because I was talking about Zach Edey, and we saw Zach Edey year by year, get better.
Improve.
Right. And the thing was clearly it was a lot different for Zach Edey in college than it's going to be in the NBA. And the reason is because Purdue's offense went through Zach Edey. More than likely he's not going to go to a team where they say, you know what, you're going to be our focal point. We're going to build around you because, you hear like the stories everybody's looking at him like mock draft wise, like late first, early second. And it's unfortunate because clearly, there was a time where it's like, okay, this kid's gonna be a top five pick, but the game has changed because of that. But getting back to,
They're
when
gonna mess around. They're gonna mess around, and Toronto gonna get him.
listen, for me, listen, I said this. I said the two best spots for Zach Edey. I said Toronto and I said Denver because
Yeah.
number one with Toronto, nobody's gonna love you like home will. And I mean, that young man is from, Canada. They would embrace him with open arms. Toronto,
Yeah.
they don't have a lot going on right now as they're rebuilding. They do have some pieces with the likes of RJ Barrett. I felt like the Knicks gave up on him too soon. They got some nice pieces back in that trade. I think it was a win-win for everybody. But nonetheless, I think he could have success there, meaning Zach Edey and the other team that I mentioned as well, the Denver Nuggets. And the reason why I said that, if you're Zach Edey, clearly you don't have to go there and start. And then you get to back up the Joker. And not only back up the Joker, you have to defend him every day in practice, but you're only going to get better at both ends of the court. And I mean, clearly we know that this young fella, can play with a back to the basket, but he's not going to dominate the same way because I'm like he's 7'4", 300, in college. You're probably if you face a guy like 6'10", okay, that's a big thing. But now you're going to be consistently facing 7-footers in the league. Clearly the game has changed. But not to sound too long-winded, but getting back to it, because we were talking about Wimby and we were talking about Bol. It just comes down to teams, okay, being patient with guys. You look at a guy like Taco Fall.
Mm-hmm.
Another prime example. Taco Falls last year at UCF, they lost to Duke in the second round, and they really should have won that game because they were winning that game. And it wasn't until Taco Fall fouled out that Duke took over. The two guys that took over, it was R.J. Barrett and Zion. Why? Because now
Mhm.
they could finally get to the basket. Okay, because at the end
Because
of the day,
Taco wasn't down there.
you can't coach 7-5. I don't care who you are,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, it just comes down to what teams, get a guy and who uh who takes the time and like really is patient and developing him. But one last
You know
question.
what I would argue
Yeah.
though?
Hmm.
I would argue that it would be detrimental to him to be picked up by somebody like Denver because I don't think he needs to be a backup at all. I think he needs to go to a trash team with no big man,
Hmm.
and I don't think that they should try to turn him into a stretch because everybody doesn't have to be a stretch.
I agree.
There, there's room for
A
a
back to
player,
back.
especially if you have Barrett, you got Quickly, you have the Swiss Army knife, who was just he was just an all-star for the first time from Toronto.
Gotcha.
He was rookie of the year last season.
Man, his name is escaping me right now. I don't know.
Scotty Barnes.
Scotty Barnes,
You
yes.
got Scotty Barnes there. Let that man be a big man and let
But
him get reps and let him make mistakes because Toronto's not winning any games.
no, they no, they listen, they're not, and I do agree with you, but the problem is it's a copycat league. And the problem
Mhm,
is like they're gonna say, well, the analytics say this and the analytics say that, and then everybody else is doing it instead of using your common sense. Prime
exactly.
prime example in which I mentioned last night, Luca Garza. If
Get that. I was thinking of him. I was
if
thinking of him.
if people remember Luca Garza's last 2 years at Iowa,
Dominant.
nobody can stop him. You go to the NBA and you go to the Pistons of all teams, and then they don't play him. They try to make him a perimeter player. And it got on my nerves because if you're the Pistons, you have nothing going on for you right now.
Anyway,
Right. Like,
anyway.
which is to your point about Toronto.
Toronto.
Listen, let this kid work in the post. But again, they're trying to make him something that he's not. Like you and I talked about it last week. 15 feet and in, nobody can stop Giannis.
Nobody.
Same thing can be said about Anthony Davis. The same thing can be said about Joel Embiid. The same thing can be said about Zach.
Hey, you brought up Dirk, right?
Mm-hmm.
You brought up Dirk. And this is what people do not talk about, right? This is what they do not talk about. When Dirk was too busy shooting threes, right, and taking up space on the perimeter,
Mm-hmm.
they got eliminated by the Golden State Warriors with Steven Jackson, all 6'7" of Steven Jackson guarding Dirk and making life a living hell for
Steven
him,
Steven
right?
Jackson, Matt Barnes, and Baron Davis.
Come on,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
When the Dallas Mavericks made that run to the championship and won it, Dirk decided to go down to the post more and take that one-footed fadeaway,
And
which
they couldn't stop.
could not be stopped. So even Dirk had to say to himself, I got to get closer to the basket. They got LeBron on me. They have, you know what I'm saying? They have
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Durant on me. I need to go down low. And it resulted in a championship because now you have more space for Jason Terry to operate on the perimeter because this 7-foot guy isn't out here taking up all of the space. Jason Kidd to operate on the perimeter. Like it makes a big difference. Kenny Lofton Jr., right? Did you see him against the Clippers?
And he's a big guy too.
Kenny Lofton Jr.
And-
When I
and-
was looking at the box score, right?
mhm.
And this is with Bones Highland on the court
Right.
for the Clippers, right? Once I looked at the box score, I already said, oh, the best player on this floor is going to be Kenny Lofton Jr. He is a certified bucket, right? He is Zach Randolph. Kenny Lofton Jr. is the light skinned Zach Randolph. That's what he is. And he's a lefty too, just like Zach. And it's like, why is this kid not in the big show consistently? Why does he keep getting sent down to the G League? Now, we might say his weight, right? But this version of Kenny Lofton Jr., it looks like he dropped about 50 pounds. It looks like 50, 60 pounds. He looked incredible. And he can shoot the three when he wants to. But
Right.
did you see him banging down low and what a problem he is down there for like everyone? And he has a scoring touch. So people could say, oh, they want, the big guns for the Clippers weren't playing. Kenny Lofton Jr. can do that against anybody.
Listen, that's gonna make for a very, very interesting playoffs, and it's like to your point, like we were saying, it's just like too often two teams, the organizations, they try to make guys, something that they're not. It's one of those where if you and I okay, we're on the same basketball team. Clearly, I didn't play organized basketball. You did. But when we did play ball together, our styles were different. It's like basically telling a coach or a coach telling you, I want you to guard, Will in the post. Okay. But then if you can't do it, the coach is getting mad at you. And then, my coach is turning around and saying, hey, you know what? Guard earn on the perimeter.
On the perimeter and chase him around and chase him through screens and
You can't be tired. What are you talking about? He's too quick for you. I'm like, and my point is this is what's happening, with with the current NBA.
yes.
You're trying to make guys into something that they're not. You know, we should be talking about Luka Garza much more than we are right now. Okay, and he's not the only guy. I'm just using him as
As an example. And
as
he's a perfect example
and I
for
and I think Zach Edey, unfortunately, he's gonna go down, that same hole because you look at the two
yeah.
bigs that are probably gonna get taken in the first round this year, Zach Edey and Donovan Clingan. And for me, I look at Donovan Clingan, he's still raw. I really thought personally he could have benefited from playing one more year at Connecticut, especially now with the NILs, because he would get the money. But the NIL money might not be for him what the NBA money could be, but they're talking about this kid like he could be top five. Okay, now Donovan Clingan is a little bit more athletic than Zach Edey, not as polished at the offensive end of the floor as Edey, but you could see Edey at times, he's slow in defense. He's going to be a defensive liability. I mean, listen, he's 7'4". You don't pay a guy who's 7'4", 300 pounds to run up and down the floor like that. Basically, defensively, you're a rim protector.
yeah, you keep him near the rim.
For the most part. But at the end of the day, I just feel like, it's what happens, like, how we talked about it before, too much of a perimeter oriented game, trying to make guys something uh that
That they're not.
that they're not. But my final question to you before we wrap up, because I feel like, we've gotten a lot of like different aspects, covered on this one. Okay, we talked about, the American born players and like the next potential faces of the league.
Mhm.
Do you see a scenario where a foreign born player can be the face of the NBA?
They already are. Luca,
Hmm.
Giannis, and Jokic. And the reason why I'm only naming those three is because Embiid is going to be playing for Team USA.
Okay,
That's why I'm only naming those three.
okay,
So just like him and Kyrie are hybrids, Embiid and Kyrie.
okay.
So yeah, they're already the faces of the league, and we're seeing more and more commercials starring Antetokounmpo now. So yeah, that's already happened. That's
Yeah,
already happened, and it's funny because Luca's in the backcourt with Kyrie.
yeah, listen, I mean, winning that championship, definitely, helped Giannis's career. And like regardless of the sport, I don't think people understand, the importance of guys winning championships, and girls, okay? But it's one of those where it takes you into another stratosphere because
Yes.
they can never refer to you the same. They can say now you're like, NBA champion, Giannis Antetokounmpo, NBA champion,
Exactly.
you know, um, um,
Jokic.
Nikola Jokic. Just ask Charles Barkley about this. And I'm not trying to be
Yeah,
disrespectful to
it's
Charles,
true.
because Charles, like for me, was one of the best players that I saw, growing up. But the reason why I bring up Charles Barkley is I think back to the 1992 Summer Olympics when the Dream Team got together, and you hear the stories about Magic being over there with Mike and Larry.
Who led the dream team in scoring?
I think it was Charles. And
Yeah.
but then when it came time to chill, sometimes they'd be like, "Listen, you ain't got no ring, so you you stay out of there."
Look
But
how they just did AI dirty with that little with that little I was about to say trophy, with that little statue
listen,
that they are putting outside the arena.
listen, the statue in itself looked like a trophy.
It looked like a trophy.
Honestly, when I saw that statue, it looked like the MVP, like a little bit bigger than the MVP trophy.
Yeah.
You,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
and you think about AI, and I mean, he's one of the greatest Sixers ever. When you think about great Sixers, you
He's
think,
one of the greatest players
yeah.
ever.
But I mean, like just for that organization, you think about him,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. J. You think about Wilt Chamberlain,
Yep.
Charles
And
Barkley.
Barkley.
Yeah, he's in that mix, man. But I'm just like, wow, if you're gonna do it, do it right. But I'll tell you like
And
this.
you could argue if he would have won a championship with the Sixers, they would have never did that.
Oh, listen, definitely not, because it's one of those where you see how some players are treated, by organizations for being great players, but being great players who don't have championships. And one prime example for that to me is Patrick Ewing, because
Yep,
I feel like Patrick Ewing has been disrespected by the Knicks organization, for far too long.
certainly.
I mean, even aside from that whole incident when he was at Georgetown and
That
Cat
was crazy.
that
That's unforgivable.
yeah, that was despicable. But then I mean Patrick Ewing should have had a statue, in front of Madison Square
Outside of
Garden
MSG.
years ago. I mean, hands down, you're talking about your franchise's best player. And the Knicks aren't the only organization. It's a lot of organizations that have done that to guys, but it just goes to show you, what a fine line it is, between winning a championship and not winning a championship.
Yeah, the stamp that it puts on you. Imagine this, right? And they're in a situation that most superstar, and NBA greats don't find themselves in, right?
Hmm.
If the Clippers win a championship this season,
Hmm.
if Russ averages 10 points a game off the bench, 10, 5, and 5, right? Harden averages 16 and 8 through this playoff run. This championship will cement them. It will eliminate them falling into the AI category, the Carmelo Anthony category. All those two guys specifically, all they need is one. They've done everything else, and they've sacrificed being on this team. It's not like their games is done. Harden just averaged 21 and 10 for Philly last season. You know what
Hmm.
I'm saying?
Right.
If Russ was starting this season, he would have averaged at least 17, 8 assists, 10 rebounds, 9 rebounds. He would have did that. If they can capture this championship, just like you said, it will be the difference in what rooms they can go into. Chris Paul, he's in a different situation. Even though they're not, if Golden State won this championship or wins this championship coming up, it's still not going to matter for him. He's not in the same situation as them. Now, if he would have won it with Phoenix, if they would have beat the Milwaukee Bucks, Chris
Different,
Paul would have been
different story.
spoken about, like right
Mhm.
underneath Isaiah Thomas.
Right.
It would have been Magic. It would have been Steph Curry. It would have been Isaiah Thomas. And then they might have mentioned Chris Paul.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think Chris Paul, the toughest thing that happened, in his career, we didn't even mention, the failed trade to the Lakers, more than a
David
decade.
Stern.
Yep. And that
David
was,
Stern.
and Dan Gilbert was the guy who forced David Stern's hand, on that trade. And it's unfortunate because everybody says, wow, that would have been, the moment
That
for
was
him.
it.
Right. But like to your point, it changes so much. I mean, we mentioned Jason Tatum earlier, and it's one of those where you can't, and it's unfortunate, but you cannot consider yourself a great Celtic if you haven't won a championship.
You gotta get at least one.
Just ask Paul Pierce because
Yep.
Paul Pierce was a great player for the Celtics for a long time. But then, of course, when they finally got over that hump, okay, and got it, it was just like, wow. And it's one of those where, KG did the bulk of his work in Minnesota. But then,
Yep.
of course, he got his championship in Boston. And you
With
got people,
Boston.
and, for what it's worth, you have some people that kind of forget that KG played, in
In
Minnesota
Minnesota.
for
In
all of
Minnesota.
for all of those years and dominated.
Yep.
But that championship just takes you
Into a
to
different stratosphere.
yeah, like I mean you, and this is why we see so many guys break down emotionally, and I'm not saying it in a bad way when they win that championship.
Yeah.
You always think about the images of Isaiah Thomas clutching that trophy and crying and kissing it when the Pistons finally won. You think about Mike, when he held that trophy in the locker room after the Bulls got the first championship. You think about LeBron, the first time, okay,
But yeah,
because because people can never say anymore, well, you know what, you couldn't get it done because guess what, you did get it done, you know,
exactly.
and it changes so much. And it's like, there's guys out there that, right now, maybe we could see a guy, come up, in this postseason and possibly be that guy, to get that championship. I know naturally people are gonna, have their odds on guys as far as being that champion, you know, a joker, what I'm saying? Even though the Lakers are in the play-in tournament, it's one of those where if you've got LeBron, you got a chance. One guy who I will also throw into that mix that we didn't talk about is Kevin Durant. And the reason why I say it is
He
this.
needs it. He
You got
needs it.
you got a lot of people out there that are still looking at him and saying, "Hey, you know what? You had the Warriors down 3-1 in OKC, left, went to them, a 73 win team, and
The
won."
team who eliminated you. The
Right,
team who eliminated you.
right. And you got two championships, you were finals MVP, but you got some people out there that they're still gonna say it was Steph Curry's team. You know
Yep.
what I'm saying? And I
I mean,
know
people out there, Bob Myers joked and damn near was saying that during their when he was giving that speech during their parade.
yeah, listen, I remember that. And I've said it before and I will continue to say it and I will say it again right now. It would not surprise me to see Kevin Durant spend the rest of his life searching for the basketball respect
Mm-hmm.
that he feels that he deserves. Because at the end of the day, Kevin Durant is one of the best scorers that the NBA has ever seen.
He's the
Okay,
most dynamic scorer
right.
in the history of the NBA.
And it's one of those where, I think, egos, got the best of a lot of people, in San Francisco, which is why KD left. He figured, let me go try to replicate this with the Nets, which was so difficult because, like, my thing is, I don't think that Kevin Durant could have picked a worse situation to go to. And the reason
In the
was
worst time.
you couldn't handle the media in Oklahoma City. You couldn't handle the media in the Bay Area. Now you're going to the media capital of the world
Yep.
and all eyes are on you. And it's basically you're coming here with your past accolades. But now you're in a situation with Phoenix. It's like it has to work.
It
It's gonna
has to.
it's going to be so tough because the Western Conference Finals or Western Conference playoffs rather, it's going to be a gauntlet. Okay, and I'm gonna be
Yep.
talking about this during the week. I know you're going to be talking about it as
It's
well.
Kawhi time.
Exactly. Listen, it's a lot of guys out there. I mean, LeBron and AD, Steph Curry, the Joker, Luca,
Yep.
Kyrie, because
Yep.
we've seen what these guys can do, on the big stage. So it's gonna be so doggone difficult. But nonetheless, he is a guy that to me, winning a championship in Phoenix for the sake of argument would kind of like supersede him getting that championship, uh, those two championships rather with the Warriors. It's kind of like, when LeBron went back to Cleveland and got that championship, and then in the way that they got the championship, coming back from 3-1, of course, the block at the end of the game, and then, getting back to the emotional aspect of it, we saw LeBron break down in a way that we've never seen LeBron,
Yeah,
break down before. Because guess what? At the end of the day, like we said before, nobody can take it away from you, man.
nobody. And it's funny, no one would have said anything to KD if he would have chose a team like the Wizards, if he would have went and hooped with Beal and John Wall, because he's from that area, the
Correct.
DMV area. Nobody would have said nothing. He
Hmm.
went to the one team where it was like, yo, dude, really? Really? And knowing that, yo, you are Kevin Durant. Just like he said when they were acting like Patrick Beverly shut him down. He's like, do you know who I am? I'm KD. He's like, yeah, dude, you're KD.
Hmm.
What? You did not need to go there. What were you thinking? What were you thinking? And we haven't even mentioned, we mentioned Jason Tatum, right?
Hmm.
I don't think Tatum is better than Devin Booker. I
See, my,
think Devin Booker is better than him.
my thing with Devin Booker is this. It's like, from like, with the exception of a scorer, to me, what does he bring to the table? Because you figure
Nothing.
he never got to the playoffs until they got Chris Paul. Okay,
But they did go 7-0 in that bubble, which made Chris Paul
one on
want to come.
right.
Because Devin Booker, that skill, that offensive skill set. There's some players where no, young man, you do what you do.
Hmm.
And his is for him, it's the scoring. I don't really care to see him do anything else. I want to just see Devin Booker put the ball in the basket.
And see, this is why the playoffs are going to be very interesting, because you got Minnesota and Phoenix in the first round. Uh, like, wow. I mean, like, listen, I trust me, I'm gonna be talking about this some more tomorrow or later today, actually. But it's one of those where there's so much to, like, really unwrap, in regards to the playoffs, because there's so many different scenarios. And some of the scenarios are playing out like you and I talked about last week, with Philly and Miami coming out of that play-in tournament
Mm-hmm.
and nobody wanting to face either one of those teams. It's like you can make a compelling argument to say, hey, you know what? Maybe the Bucks were looking at this thing like, you know what? We really don't want one of those top two seeds in the East. We're
We
gonna
need to drop. We need to fall in these standings. We need to fall to number three. We
you
need to
know,
fall to number three.
yeah, because I'm like, the Knicks are happy, and I know their fan base is going crazy right now in New York that they got the two spot. But I'm like, do you really want the two spot? Because I'm looking, you're either looking at Philly or Miami, and honestly, if
That's
you,
your reward. That's
yeah,
how you reward Jalen
and
Brunson.
and we saw what Miami did to them last year. With Jimmy Butler, he took their lunch money, man. you
And now
know,
they got Terry Rozier. That's crazy.
listen, another guy who's not afraid of the spotlight, man. So the playoffs are going to be insane. And I will say this as a final thought, and I'll turn it over to you.
Uh-huh.
I think that, some people are going to say, what they say about foreign born players. Some people are going to say what they say about American born players. But I think the game is in a good spot. I think, to me, the biggest thing are, like, the fundamentals. That's the biggest thing for me, and I think it starts at the defensive end of the floor, because we see a lack of defense. Guys
Mm-hmm.
guys don't defend pick and rolls. You know,
Some
some
of them can't. Some of
Yeah,
them can't even do it. So you're
no,
super right. You're
yeah,
super correct.
and there's a lot that goes into that. But I will say, and I think it started with David Stern. David Stern, and this goes back to the 80s. I think David Stern understood the importance of it, expanding his product. And
Mm-hmm.
before we had the Dream Team, we had, NBA teams going overseas to play, because
Yeah, for the exhibition games.
I remember the Celtics did it, the Lakers did it, the Knicks did it. And
Chicago.
right. And then once they had once the Americans lost in the Olympics in '88, and they were like, wait a minute, our college kids are playing, they're grown men. from these countries overseas, it was kind of like, okay, you know what? Yo, we're gonna bring over our best as well. And of course, the game has changed so much since then. I mean, we talked about like the star players or
Hmm.
the Hall of Famers, who have come from, other countries, other continents such as Europe. But there's been guys that I think a lot of people forget that they came over and contributed in a good way in the NBA. Rudy Fernandez, one name for me that I think, people, you know, clearly forget. Arvidas,
Wasn't he still out there this summer?
he's been out there,
Yeah, Rudy was still out there.
basically Rudy Fernandez, I think he got tired of just playing in America.
Yeah, he
And
did.
he went back. But I'm like, that guy could play. I know like,
Drazen,
Drazen
rest in
Petrovic,
peace. Drazen Petrovic.
and he was on his way to stardom. You know what I'm
Yep.
saying? People, forget how, Vlade Divac was ahead of his time as a center. And
A
Vlade
passing center.
and Vlade had a tough job, man, because Vlade was a guy who replaced Kareem with the
Hmm.
you know what I'm saying? Those are
Big
basically
shoes to fill.
right, and they still got to the Western Conference Finals. I mean, pardon me, to the NBA Finals rather. Excuse me.
Hmm.
With Vlade Dottie, at center, and Dino Raja, a guy from
Yep,
about
Boston
20 years,
Celtics.
right? And there's so many others that
Deadlift Shrimp,
Detlef
Seattle Supersonics.
Detlef Schrempf, Peja Stojakovic,
Hmm.
was
Killer.
was another name as well, and even Hedo Turkoglu, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? A guy who was drafted by the Spurs, had success with the Kings, and then of course helped
Went
the
to Orlando and helped Dwight Howard reach the
yeah,
finals.
that was 2010. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So yeah, so it's one of those where I think the game is in a better spot, because it's more global. And I'm like,
Yes.
we're talking about global. How could we talk about, international players and not talk about the impact that a guy like Yao Ming, had on the NBA?
China.
Because
China.
you
Whole huge market. Maybe the
you
biggest market.
you look at those years when Yao Ming was healthy and was playing, he was the leading vote getter for the All-Star game,
Every year.
and it wasn't even close. you know,
He was
you,
starting over Shaq.
yeah,
Whereas if it was just a basketball decision, there's no way in the world that
yeah,
would have happened. For all of
and
those people in China voting.
yeah, and I mean Andrew Bogut was another guy, first overall out of Utah,
Australia, right?
from the great country of Australia. And then I think back to the last championship that the Spurs won in 2014, where the bulk of their team was not even born in the United States. I mean, Tim Duncan, Virgin Islands, Tony Parker, France, Manu
Well, at
Ginobili.
least Tim Duncan is the U.S. Virgin
It's the
Islands.
U.S. Virgin Islands, but
Yeah.
it wasn't the continental,
Yeah. Yep. I get what you're
uh,
saying. Yep.
United States. I believe Boris Diaw was
Yep.
on that team. I think Leandro
Barbosa,
Barbosa, right?
Brazil.
Right. And there were so many others. You know what I'm saying? And we could just go right down the list. But I mean, honestly,
Who's the greatest foreign born player of all time?
ooh,
The
wow.
greatest, number one, the greatest foreign born player all time.
Well, for me, it's one of
Yeah.
those where I'm gonna say a guy that we just mentioned his country, and
Hmm.
I say Tim Duncan. And I mean,
You
I
said Tim
know,
Duncan?
because like I know people are gonna say, well, the Virgin Islands is U.S. territory, but I'm looking at the United States, the 50 states. Uh,
Okay.
but for me, I'm gonna say Tim Duncan because I look at him and the haters are gonna say,
Hmm.
well, he walked into a situation where David Robinson was already there. Very true.
Hmm.
But the thing is like he kept it going, for so long. And I mean, the guy was so fundamentally sound. I
Hmm.
mean,
The
it's
big
like,
fundamental.
listen, I ask anybody, you go into a gym and try to hit 20 consecutive bank shots and see what happens.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? It was just one of those things. Like you just couldn't stop it. For me, for my money, I'll put it on Tim Duncan.
I actually thought that his bank shot was one of the best, and Scottie Pippen's bank shot on a fast break was one of the best I had ever seen. When I saw Scottie pull up for bank shots on a fast break, it was almost like, yo, what is that? I didn't even know that that was a weapon. And then after seeing Scottie Pippen do it consistently, it was like, oh, I have to add that. Like that is a weapon.
It's like
Oh,
it's like real quick. It's like Tim Duncan brought playing pool to the NBA because pool. If you shoot pool, it's a lot about angles, and
mm-hmm.
it's like it's the same thing with that bank shot. It's
Yeah,
like you have to like go at the backboard, at a certain angle, or else it ain't gonna work. And I
yeah,
mean, it's one of those where Tim Dunn did it, against Rasheed. Of course, they played each other in college. Shaq. Um, Dirk,
Chris Webber,
Chris Webber, and
every Kevin Garnett, he gave it to Kevin Garnett the worst.
and
For all that people say about Kevin Garnett, he didn't want no parts of Tim Duncan.
and it was so funny because Kevin Garnett, every single time they played, he tried and tried and tried to get under his skin, and it
It
just
wouldn't work.
it just never worked, man.
Yep, it didn't work. In my opinion, the greatest foreign-born player also doubles as my favorite center of all time, and this is including Kareem, including Shaq. To me, the greatest foreign-born player in the world ever was Hakeem Olajuwon, and he had everything. And when people mention the most skilled players of all time, they usually mention Kobe and Kyrie, right? And they forget about Hakeem. And they forget that Kobe went to Hakeem to work on post moves. They forget that. Kareem had everything, the whole offensive package, everything, right? But then he also had the complete defensive package. And we're not just talking about blocks, we're talking about steals too. To me, Hakeem Olajuwon, Dirk couldn't see Hakeem Olajuwon. Jokic would not be able to see Hakeem Olajuwon. The only one with his type of skill set would be a Joel Embiid, and he's not durable enough
Nah,
to consistently see a Hakeem Olajuwon. So I think that Hakeem Olajuwon is the greatest foreign-born player of all time.
you know what? There's a lot of people out there who would not disagree with you, at all. I said Tim Duncan, you said Akeem, and there's gonna be plenty of people that agree with what we said. But both of them have something in common. And I think it's the fact that they excelled at other sports that really helped them,
Yep.
in the NBA because you figure Tim Duncan was a swimmer and he was
Yep.
actually getting ready to like try to qualify for the Olympics until the swimming facility that he was practicing at got destroyed by a hurricane and he didn't want to swim in the ocean with the sharks. I don't blame him. What I'm saying?
So I think
But
I'll go play basketball.
exactly. But you figure, I mean, you just look at Tim Duncan's length, and people don't understand when you're a swimmer, swimmers tend to have longer torsos,
Mm-hmm.
and I think all of that really helped him playing basketball. And then Akeem was a
Soccer.
soccer player. And it's
Yep.
like
Soccer.
I don't people don't understand. My wife played soccer, and it's one of those where the footwork that you need to play soccer is phenomenal. And I mean, to the point that we saw Akeem in his prime make Hall of Fame centers look bad. I mean, he
Who
made
did he run through? Let's run down the list. He ran
David,
through the
David,
MVP, David Robinson.
right? Shaquille O'Neal, Patrick Ewing, what I'm saying? And like
He did
basically,
Patrick so bad that they would put in Oakley and
and then
Mason
and Charles
on
Smith,
Hakeem
right,
instead of Ewing.
right,
That's how bad he was
yeah,
doing Patrick Ewing. It
yeah.
made Shaq look like a child.
And to your point, getting back to '94, that was something that was lost in it because it was one of those where 10 years before that, you know, Patrick beat Akeem for the championship in college,
In
but
college.
when they met, Hakeem didn't have Drexler anymore. Okay, because Drexler had gone on to the NBA. He had got drafted by Portland. But it's one of those where he had the pieces around him, and Pat Riley put Patrick Ewing on Hakeem in game one. And to Pat Riley's credit, he was like, "Yeah, this ain't
I
working."
got to switch this up.
Yeah,
I
you
got to
know,
switch this up.
Now, Pat Riley should have made another adjustment in that series, which was, maybe sit down John Starks in Game 7. That's a whole nother discussion. But nonetheless, you know, Patrick had nothing for Hakeem, and you talk when we talking about Patrick, one of the greatest centers ever. Shaq, he made Shaq look like a little boy,
like
and
a child.
honestly, what he did to David Robinson was child abuse.
It was. It
It's
really was.
it's one of those where, listen, Akeem was one of the greatest. There, like, nobody's going to debate that.
At
And
all.
for me, this is why it pains me when I watch basketball and they try to make the bigs, something that they're not, because you couldn't stop Hakeem in the post. You know
At
what
all.
I'm
At
saying?
all. He did moves. It was a reason why they called him Hakeem the Dream. And they called that move the Dream Shake.
Correct.
Because he did moves that you could only dream of. It was like,
Right.
yo, what is that?
Because, when you think about bigs, you think about guys that really weren't that quick. I mean, you look at a guy who was a good center during that era, Rick Smits, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But you
Duncan Dutchman.
you weren't gonna ask Rick Smits to go out there and run a fast break and do all of that. Rick Smits
No.
was a big dude. Rick Smits was 7'4". Rick Smits was
Yep.
probably like 300. And the thing is like the reason why guys like Shaq, guys like Patrick Ewing had problems with Rick Smits was because, hey, they were not accustomed to having to face guys bigger than
Then
them
them.
who are also skilled. But my point is, Rick Smits didn't have the footwork of an Akeem. You know what I'm saying? He was still a good center. Or Tree Rollins. Tree Rollins, he was a big guy. You know what I'm saying? They didn't see guys with the footwork of an Akeem. The same
No.
way guys didn't see a guy with the brute strength and the
Of
agility.
Shaq.
Correct. You know what I'm saying? And that's what, allowed Shaq to dominate. I mean, we're talking about Hall of Fame players making other Hall of Fame players look bad.
Yes.
Just look at what Shaq did to Dikembe Mutombo in the finals in 2001. And I
LA
mean,
versus Philly
yeah, and you're talking about Dikembe Mutombo, one of the best defensive centers
that we've
ever.
ever seen. That
Correct.
we've ever seen.
You know what I'm saying? But it's
Look
just,
what he used to do to Zoe. Look
yeah.
what Shaq used to do to Zoe, like he wasn't even there.
Yeah. Well, you know what it was? I think Shaq took it personal because, Zoe came out the same year as that Shaq did. And you remember what when Shaq was talking when he did the track with the Fushnikins,
Mm-hmm.
and he talked about Christian Leighton and he talked about, Alonzo Mourning on that track, but getting back to Akeem, man, it's just one of those where I don't think the game has ever seen, even to this point, a center
Like that.
with his footwork, because if he faced you up, he was so quick off of that first step because he had the footwork of a guard. Okay,
Exactly, because of soccer.
right. And when I say a guard, oh,
Like fleet-footed.
I mean it,
Fleet-footed like a guard.
I mean in a point guard like a Tim Hardaway, like an Isaiah Thomas, who those guys were so explosive off of their first step. So I mean, Akeem, he just made grown men just look bad.
Yes.
There's no way around it, and it's just like Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan just bored you.
Bored you to death. It was funny because you would think that nothing was really going on. At the end of the game, okay, the Spurs won. They won 95-87. Tim Duncan, 22 points, 13 rebounds, 3 blocks, 4 assists, 7 for 10 from the free throw line. He only had like 2 fouls. Your big man got fouled out. He left room on the plate for Ginobili to eat, for Tony Parker to eat. It was crazy. And this was consistently night in, night out. And it was like, yo, I didn't even see him doing that on the court. But the box score is commensurate with what the win-loss column says. It was crazy. It was
Listen,
crazy.
listen, he was the big fundamental. It was one of those where, to me, I know that when Patrick Ewing, came into the league, people said he had the potential to be the next Bill Russell. But I really do feel that Tim Duncan, in my opinion, okay, I think that Tim Duncan was closer to Bill Russell than Patrick Ewing was from his ability to win, but then also his ability to affect the game at both ends of the floor. Because Tim Duncan will block some shots.
Yeah.
And Tim Duncan would hustle. Okay, there was never a situation where Tim Duncan, you could never accuse him of loafing. And it was so
Exactly.
and it was unfortunate when the Spurs lost to the Heat in 2013. They were
I
up three
wanted the Spurs to win that. I
and
wanted them to win that.
and they were up 3-2, and Kawhi missed those free throws. People forget in game six, man, it was vintage Tim Duncan.
Hmm.
Like Chris Bosh had no answers for him.
At all.
You know what I'm saying? So I think, that's just my personal take. I think he, for me, was my all-time, you know, uh foreign born player, man.
Nice.
You know,
Nice.
but Ern, I want to first of all, once again, take this time to thank you for joining me. We talked about, a lot over the last, close to 90 minutes. And, I've talked about some of the good things you have done and some of the things that you are currently doing. My point is this: where can people find you? What platforms can people find you on?
So currently, as it pertains to YouTube, people can just put in that search bar at NBA. No, at Brothers Talking NBA Basketball, right? So that's at Brothers Talking NBA Basketball.
Mhm.
On IG, it's at Ernest_Dancy. That's ERNEST_DANCY. And it's the same for TikTok. So that's where you can catch the Brothers Talking NBA Basketball podcast.
Listen, Ernest, as always, it was a pleasure. You and I did this a couple of days ago, and we're going to be doing a lot more of this, whether it's on this channel, whether I'm on your channel, because there's going to be, well, not there's going to be, there is, okay, so much to talk about. The play-in tournament, all
Yep.
right, the NBA playoffs. We talked about, a couple of aspects of it last week. There's a plethora to talk about, now, and it's only going to intensify as the rounds, go on.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the NBA draft in
Yep.
about 2.5 months, and then, of course, free agency kicks off right
Which
around.
is going to be exciting. Free agency is going to be super exciting.
And I think it's going to be a little bit more exciting this year,
Hmm.
due to the fact of that additional apron. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because it's going to make
The R's are going to be moving.
a lot of teams think twice as far as who they sign and who they don't sign and who they potentially trade. So, it's one of those where folks, if you like, what you heard, from right now from us, there's going to be plenty more of this coming. But folks, that is going to wrap it up for this edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Once again, I want to thank, Ernest Dancy for joining me on this edition of NBA Talk. He has let you know where you could check him out. As always, like I tell you, please feel free to hit that like button. Please feel free to subscribe to this channel if you have not. You can always check me out on Twitter at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. And also check us out on Facebook on the Sports Depot 365. So, as always, thank you so much for joining me. Thank all of you out there for tuning in. And thanks once again for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast on YouTube. As always, I'm William Martin signing off, saying take care and be well.